All right. Good morning and welcome everybody to our final Odyssey of the 2024 season. We didn't necessarily save the best to last, but he'll be pretty good. John Maher is our can't talk presenter today. So the format, as most of you know, is that we're going to give John a chance to talk uninterrupted for 30 to 40 minutes. Then we will stop, take a just quick silence break to kind of gather our thoughts, let him gather his, and then there'll be time for questions and answers. And I will pass the microphone to folks who wish to ask questions. Therefore, both the question and the answer gets on our recording. Also, John has the option of not answering any questions that he chooses not to do without fear of penalty. Or he can put a spin on it, or he can change the subject entirely, completely up to him. Without further ado, John.
Okay. Um, I took this, I thought Odyssey was a good name for it, and I took it that way. I want to talk this morning about how I got right here, right now, and why I am as happy and grateful as I am to be right here, right now. Um, I think insofar as spirituality is concerned, if we're really honest with each other, none of us is going to get out of this life with anything better than a working hypothesis. And the reason I like that is that a a faith tradition or belief system is something you follow, and working hypothesis is something you reevaluate with new information and is constantly under review and improvement. Um, I okay, facts. I'm going to be 83 very soon. I was born September 12th, 1941, in a town of about 5 or 6,000, Carroll, Iowa, which is about 230 miles north on Highway 71. Irish Catholic community. I'm an Irish Catholic kid, third of seven. Um, a little bit of grim stuff. Growing up, there was violence in our home. My dad gave me a model of fatherhood and grandpa that has served me and my family very, very well. He was a kind and demonstrative man whom I grew to understand saw his real treasure in life as his kids and grandkids. My mom came from a very chaotic background. She had depression, she had all kinds of issues, and she was angry and physically and emotionally and mentally violent for all the time that I lived in that house. And the reason that is pertinent is, and this was the beginning, this is my earliest spiritual memory. Um, a dour, Ross pompous old German priest standing in his pulpit. I was about 6 years old, and my mom was sitting right here, inches. And he gave a sermon, the title of which was "Never Strike a Child in Cold Blood," and the subtitle was "Hit 'Em When You're Mad." And I can. It was 77 years ago, and I remember it like it was sometime last month. He thundered at the uh, congregation. Uh, it is it is the it is the righteous rage behind the blow that drives home the moral message.
Mm.
And 6 years old, what do you make out of that? But I grew up. I that that kind of thing that I was living in a violent house and that was fine with God is really the message I had for a while. And then as I grew, I had 12 years of Catholic education, and as I grew,
Mm.
I began to understand that it wasn't necessarily God that thought that, it was just the Catholic Church. And then I thought maybe it was just Father Pecos. I never did get all of that entirely sorted out. But I had 12 years of Catholic education during which they discouraged any questions. Christianity or Catholicism, to me, the basis was that God was all knowing and all powerful and loved me and knew how many hairs I had on my head and when a sparrow fell and all that. And he made heaven for me to enjoy with him after I was a good person. But for some reason, he couldn't let me in until his son came down, became a human, and was beaten and butchered to death. And that didn't add up to me. And I would, from time to time, ask questions about it. And the answer was usually, you're not nurturing your faith with questions like that. And it was a kind of a theological way of saying, shut the hell up. Um, so I, and I'm trying to get this stuff out of the way because these are the obstacles I'm talking about. And I, after I graduated high school, and let me just tell you about Carol Ann Zavino. She's somebody I will never forget. When I got navigating confession and puberty at the same time were really hard. I don't know how much you know about confession, but you're supposed to tell the priest what you did and how many times you did it. And when we got into the high grades, they started telling us about impure thoughts. And they had, in high school, they had dress up Friday. And Carol Ann Zavino used to wear these tight sweaters that really were challenging. I'd come out of geometry class thinking I'm going to hell for sure. I actually had a criterion for mortal sins as opposed to venial sins. Still $100. That's probably a mortal sin. And I come out of geometry class thinking I got to confess that was way better than stealing $100. But I got there. I graduated. I went to the University of Iowa, uh, great journalism school. They taught you broadly. I mean, they really wanted you to know what you were going to be a journalist about. And you took statistics and Western civilization, history, social theory, economic systems. It's a wonderful education. But late in my first year, I discovered the Council of Nicaea. Do you guys know about the Council of Nicaea? They met from 300 current era to about 600 at the behest of the Emperor Constantine, who wanted them to be his state religion. It was a way of organizing and keeping track of what people thought. But if you want to, in a nutshell, a characterization of what it was, think of a book banning, history modifying Florida school board meeting that went on for 300 years. And one conflict resolution that was approved was murder. It was just awful. It was the most cynical possible way to put together a belief system that you wanted to thrust onto people for millennia to come. And it was deeply disillusioning. All the times Father Donahue told me to shut up when I asked questions, and he had been hiding this stuff from me. And I was angry. But 12 years of Catholic education, you're scared to be too angry. So I just backed away from it for what turned out to be about 20 years. I graduated from the University of Iowa. I went to the Air Force. That had been my boyhood dream to be a United States Air Force fighter pilot, and I did it. But from the time I first got in there, I noticed something that we did a lot of stuff uniform together, and I knew you had to have people you could drop into slots here and there. But this had a different character to it because they also wanted you to be ready to change if, if circumstances warranted. And I discovered fairly early on that what they wanted me to be was a part of something much greater than myself, but a functioning, thinking, contributing part. And if I approached it with that mental framework, life was going to be a whole lot easier. And and I did, and I learned. And when I got into a fighter squadron, it was it was that philosophy on steroids. What we did was dangerous. We flew airplanes 150 feet off the ground, treetop level, at about 500 miles an hour. And if you were not on top of your game, you might have an awfully bad afternoon. But we took care of each other. Um, we knew the mission. They told us that you guys, we were close air support. We would support troops in contact with the enemy. And they told us, you guys are the reason for the Air Force. All this other stuff, all these computers, all these transport airplanes, all that don't have any other purpose than to get you into the ground, into the air. Well, and truthful, well, I'll tell you about it. And into the air and doing your job. They would stand you at a brace and say, "What is the mission of the United States Air Force?" And you were expected to yell back, "Sir, the mission of the United States Air Force is to fly and to fight, and don't you ever forget it." Um, but we hung with each other, and everybody knew that doing your part was the most important thing. We had a joke, the fighter pilot's prayer, and it was very direct and very crude. Um, went, um, "Dear Lord, please don't let me fuck up." And and there was the obvious joke that we could drop the F bomb into any context. But there was the other one, the underlying message that in the universe, in our universe, the things you wish for, want, hope for, or pray for, doing your part for the greater entity properly came ahead of praying for your own life. And I knew guys who followed that philosophy into a smoky black hole in the ground. But I guess my point here is that my introduction to this idea of belonging to and giving yourself to something greater than yourself was introduced to me and then clicked into me on steroids. Um, I did my 5 years active duty. I had planned to stay longer. It wasn't that satisfying. I thought I'd look at the airlines. That was no go. I went to law school. And early on, they taught us about justice as almost, well, actually metaphysical human value. They taught us that the so called um, golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that was really just the first iteration of the principle of justice, in that your demand for treatment at a certain level simply because you're a human being was was intertwined, inextricably intertwined with your defense or promotion of that same thing for everybody else. And if you didn't make that commitment, then you could not expect there to be justice. And that was the real meaning of the golden rule. But they also pointed out to us, and I don't know how much you know about a common law system. Common law is made in courtrooms with lawyers trying cases. It's made in situations. And they taught me that um, we were privileged to be not just spectators, close spectators, but also participants in what they referred to as the human search for justice. And that thing I'd learned in the Air Force had not been spiritual. It had been just something that felt very, very satisfying. But I recognized it again in what they said about that. And that was at some time during law school. And I thoroughly enjoyed law school. I thoroughly enjoyed law practice. Um, that began to become what I now identify as the primary spiritual principle under which I practically live my life. Um, I don't want to forget anything. I stayed connected with the Air Force through the Air National Guard for another 15 years, through law school and on. A year and a half after I uh, graduated from law school, I went to this party I got invited to by a woman I kept meeting in the laundromat. And there I met Peg. And there I subsequently, over years, found out that that's where my real life began. We were talking about what I was going to say here, and she said, "Do you want me to be there?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to leave that up to you, but I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to say something nice about you." And, well, and I said that because Peg has such a hard time with compliments. She feels like she's attracting attention to herself, so on and so on and so on. And it's just the way she was raised. So I said, "I'm going to say something nice about you." And she said, "What are you going to say?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to say I met you and I didn't realize it for a number of years, but that's when my real life began." And she says, "Yeah, and you're still learning it, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm not going." Anyway, that's when real life began. And with the Guard, the Air National Guard, my law practice, I was living out and loving and enjoying this sensation, the meaning and satisfaction you get out of devoting yourself to something much, much bigger. You don't get lost, you don't get muffled, you get amplified. And it was just, I was having a very good life. Kids started coming along and life got even better. But when they started getting close to school age, we thought we should introduce them to, we were both lapsed Catholics for basically the same reasons. And we should introduce them to the idea of spirituality and religion. We didn't know anything. We didn't have somebody like Melanie. We didn't have a church. We didn't know anything about UU. And the default was Catholic. So we put them in a Catholic school and joined a Catholic parish. And that lasted for a while. But then I got into a tangle with one of the priests in a big learning session that for parents. And he asked, how do you get kids to do what you want to do? And I say, well, you do it with them, set the pace, show them how, and then turn it over to them. And he mocked me in front of everybody. And then he proceeded to tell us, way to raise a kid is tell them to do something. If they don't do it, hit them with your hand. Called it a hand and a spoon. Hit them with your hand. And then if they still don't do it in a reasonable time, you get a wooden spoon out of the drawer and you hit them with the spoon. And I thought, these people have not changed. I had gotten one good thing I'd like to mention in passing, and that is that a kindly Irish priest um, preached a sermon about don't pray or wish away your troubles. They're the only things in your life that give you any strength or definition or self. If you didn't have them, you'd be a blob of flesh and nothing more. And I have resorted to that many times, never forgot that. Only good thing I got out of about 6 or 7 years of belonging to that parish. So I gradually pulled out. And we were unchurched for oh, 3, 4, 5 years. And Peg got involved with the United Nations Association, and she was selling UNICEF Christmas cards to benefit UNICEF. And she had Emily with her, who was first years in high school by then. And one place they got to go to sell these cards was the lobby of People's Church Unitarian Universalist in Cedar Rapids. That's where we spent our working lifetimes. And business was a little slower, and they got to reading the leaflets. And Peg's found one that said, no one really knows what happens after we die. And she said, a church that admits it? And Emily just got a handful of them. She came home to me. I was reading the paper. And she came to me and she said, "Dad, we were at this church today, and I read this stuff, and I thought, wow, here's a church even Dad would like." And and so we tried it out and got to know it a little bit. Um, and we decided we'd join. Now, here's a Catholic man, or at least someone with 12 years of Catholic education. I'm going to tell you, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I think one of the major purposes of Catholic education is to make you scared not to be a Catholic. And and it's it's Catholicism and Christianity, I believed for ever since I discovered the Council of Nicaea. I believe that they are fear-based, period. Nobody could really love a God who did what the God of Christians is said to have done. It sounds more like a mafia don than a God. Um, and so I never really on any serious level connected with it. Well, we got to the church, the Unitarian Universalist church. And I will tell you that I only began to scratch the surface. This place is where I really began to connect my own idea of spirituality with a church. But what happened? Here comes one. Uh, Gosh, I can't even approach it. Just give me a second. If I talk, I can keep my voice steady. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk. And we learned and met people and decided we liked the place and we'd try it. And we decided to join. We went to a meeting of new members and the minister and the pillars of the church. And we had a very nice meeting. We were supposed to introduce ourselves by the our first name, our first pet, and our last name was the maiden name of our mother. We all knew each other's names. It was just a fun thing that's wonderful minister Linda Hanson decided would kind of make everybody relax and laugh a little. And so we got into it, and I knew then that it was like closing the door. I knew by being where I was that I was closing the door on Catholicism and opening this new door. And I worried about it. In the Catholic Church, one of their word tricks is if you leave, they call you a fallen away, like you're doomed, like you're tumbling into an abyss. And I complained about that at that meeting, and I said it in just those words. That it was arrogant, and it made me angry to treat someone like they were falling and lost forever. And Holly Ely approached. Boom. My emotions come a lot closer to the surface as I get older. Approached Peg and said, "You tell John," out of my hearing. Well, she didn't say it loud. I'm saying it loud so I don't get goopy. She said, "You tell John, we'll catch him."
Oh,
And they did.
uh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we really enjoyed the place. And of course, our daughter, she went to law school, Megan, and she and her husband, she married the smartest guy in her law class. Um, they got married and they came down here. We're on the phone, and my daughter, the lawyer, says, "Dad, if you guys would consider retiring down here, I'd be willing to throw in a couple of grandkids to sweeten the deal." Yeah. She has she has a wonderfully wry sense of humor. I just love her. And that's one of the little bombs that she and her sisters have set off for me the day when you suddenly realize that you've raised a child that you respect and your relationship becomes collegial as you become people who know each other and consult each other in the business of living a good life by doing it thoughtfully. Anyway, that's Megan. And I got three grandsons who lived 1.4 miles from the end of my driveway. We looked at 40 houses coming here and found one we liked. And then, wonder of wonders, it was less than a mile from the Unitarian Church, which we joined at the first opportunity. I had been in church governance in Cedar Rapids, and we didn't have a covenant. Um, we got an interim minister who put us through the process, and we made this enormous, ungainly thing. But I came here, and we had this three clause, wise, brought here by a guy named Mondale, brother of Walter Mondale. Um, a three clause statement that we could say to each other very, very often. And that was really, I, I put on Kendall asked me to do a service, and I did it on the covenant, and I studied it and learned a lot about covenants and covenants in the context of this church. And um, it's got two dwell together in peace and help one another, which are living modes. And they, to me, create a protected space where we can do the third one, which is seek the truth in love. People, I don't know if maybe you know this, maybe this is, oh, what are you going through this for? But covenant is our freedom document. We say that we are a congregation of covenant and not of creed. Other faith traditions have a creed that binds them. We want to be without creed. We want to study together. We want to learn together. And it's our covenant that binds us instead of a creed. And it creates our tradition of being a non creedal, yet closely bound, closely knit community. And what it is at last for me is an invitation to be part of something bigger than myself. Bingo, that same old, and and and, and that's how it is. And this place for me has an absolute smorgasbord of bigger things. I'm going to go out within the next. Well, I'm not sure. I haven't been told what my schedule is. I'm gonna go out canvas for vote for the reproductive rights amendment. I go out to Carver. I mean, it's just everywhere. And and for me, with my particular background and my particular bent, it is the best place to be. Um, I think that's it. Let me look my sheet. Oh, this is Gopi, but I think I've got my Gopiness done. I had an experience with covenant that you might roll your eyes, but I'm an ADD kid, and I know the words of the covenant. And I'm saying the covenant one day, and I'm looking around just to see who's there. Who's here today? Sharon and Diane are here, and Bill Cranch is here, and um, Fred Zane, and just looking around and seeing who's here. Ginger's here, and so on. Mostly because I'm in the back, I'm looking at the backs of their heads while they recite the covenant. And gee, very suddenly looking at all these people and saying the words I was saying just came together, and I started, and it came out of the abstract, and I was actively covenanting with people I knew and cared about and trusted. and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It all came together that way. And now I just do it routinely when it's time to say the covenant. I look around at everybody and you guys don't know it, but I'm covenanting. And that I think is everything.
Thank you so much, John. Okay, let's take our minute to breathe. So, as we pass the collection basket, I'm going to also pass the microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring it to you. And I'm wiping away the tears because of that was such a beautiful, I don't know. In my old church, we would have called it a testimony. But
Well,
no, yeah,
I do just want to say one more thing. I'm not saying that I am good at living the way I think I ought to live. I don't always, I don't want anybody to think I'm telling you that this is how you ought to live or a preachy. This is what I think and what I try and don't always succeed at.
gotcha. Questions?
That comment sounds like you've still got a little Catholic guilt happening. How do you fight against that?
How do I what?
Fight against that. Be affirming to yourself and all you do that is of value and positive.
Well, I'm not even sure I understand the question. You're asking how I how I can be bold enough to assert what I am without letting my, say, Catholic modesty get in the way. Is that the question? Um, I'm not sure. Partly it's the ADD kid in me. Um, Partly I don't do it. Um, Partly like with this, there are things that I feel so strongly about that they flow to some extent. I don't know if this was a flow, but I can get them out and feel great about them, and that's when I can dump all that stuff. I also I resent the Catholic Church. I think they fail badly to actively engage people in the spiritual process.
Well, I have the mic, so I guess I'm next. Um, I wonder, well, first an observation. A lot of people that I talk with about Unitarian Universalism counter with it sounds like you spend all your time in your head thinking about things. It must just be a group of people who think about things a lot. And then I reply, we do a lot of things also. But it was the thinking and the joyful aspect of religion. A lot of times when you go to a church, especially one that's somewhat charismatic, a lot of people are jumping around and singing and praising and being very much in what they would term a spiritual moment. I see you in that place at Carver. I have never seen someone walking down the hall surrounded by little boys chattering the way that you chatter, holding your plastic lunch tray and finding a place to have a time together. And we've talked about this because you felt you had to get permission not to be teaching something, but just to be mentoring and enjoying something. You do it wonderfully. But what else do you do for fun?
Well, a lot of it is my grandsons. Um, I'm getting old and my body demands that I exercise it, or it's going to say, I quit. Screw this. You either take me out and work me out, or I'm just going to collapse. How's that grab you? And so a lot of it is, and Peg thinks I preoccupy with exercise, but I know how quickly you lose it if you stop. And I, the novelty never seems to wear off with my grandsons. Um, they are, they are, they get awards in school for showing empathy and being respectful and being responsible. They are interesting little thinkers. They are good guys without being goody kids. Um, they get to crack their fair share of the time, but their teachers really and their peers really like them and respect them. And I don't know, maybe it's disproportionate. Peg and I are doing some traveling. Um, more and more. Peg uh, drags me shuffling and grumping off to places where I have just a wonderful time. and I'm a guy who apparently takes a lot of repetitions because we just went someplace and had a wonderful time, and now we're talking about a cruise to Alaska next year, and I'm grumbling and shuffling. Again, I know I'm going to have a wonderful time, and I just can't figure it out. But maybe have I answered your question? Thanks for asking it.
So, John, I was also raised Catholic, and I think from the nods and what I think a lot of us were have those same scars. So there's a couple things that you said that I was like, yes, yes. So, but my question is, in your law practice, I don't know what kind of law you practice, but more specifically, what in that practice made you feel more connected with that larger purpose of
Well,
justice?
thank you. I wanted to do that, but I knew I was on a timetable and I set a goal to be done at 10. I don't know how many of you know what the common law tradition is. Okay, just so we're all on the same page. Common law is not statutes passed by the legislature. It is a body of law that interprets statutes, and then there is a section of law around negligence and contracts and things like that that have no statutes. That's all courtroom decisions. They start in a trial where people get into an argument, and a judge either they want a judge to rule based on this, or if you have a jury, they want the judge to instruct the jury that this is the law, and this you have to use this in finding out who's right here. And my point is, and I was a trial lawyer. My point is that it starts with a lawyer who tells the judge, I want you to instruct. I think the law, as it sits now, indicates this. And the other guy says, no, I think it indicates that. And the judge picks one. And if somebody doesn't like it, they go on up, they appeal it and to the highest court in the jurisdiction. I've got a lot of good cases in the reporters of the state of Iowa. And that gets reported in books and now online as well. And that's how the common law is built. It goes clear back to Edward II. It is built by the wisdom of each situation, and you're required to follow that precedent in the jurisdiction once it has set. And they improve on it with a new, slightly different situation. They'll write a new opinion if it's appealed that will say, okay, we will. All damages in contracts have to be foreseeable. You have to have, and then they'll say, but this is foreseeable, this is not, and they just develop a tree, a branch of decisions of wisdom, uh, common law wisdom that people follow. And and as a trial lawyer, I got involved in that many times, and went to the Supreme Court, and Sometimes I would get a judge reversed. Sometimes I was on the judge's side, and I got him affirmed. But then that became the law. It's developed situationally, and now there's this whole body. There are thousands of cases in Iowa, and I got maybe a dozen or so. But I made that, and some of them were important. Um, and I got to participate in what is literally, and I believe in it, my son's a little highfalutin, but the human search for justice in a very real way. And I loved it.
John, you are one of 7 children. Do you still have contact with any of your siblings?
Yes, I do. Um, we're not all that often, but it's one of those things like if I don't speak with one of my sisters for 6 months, um, it's like we talked yesterday when I call her up. And I've got an older sister who looked out for me in the midst of the violence. She was as much mom as I had. She's 3 years older than I, and she sent me an email in which she told me that she wanted to tell me something. She didn't want to be standing by my coffin telling other people. She wanted to tell me. And she told me that of all the kids, I was most like my dad. And you couldn't say a nicer thing to me. We revered that guy. And Father Pecos and his crap. I to this day think my dad would have been more protective of us in our circumstances if Father Pecos hadn't said, "Yeah, that's the way to do it." And he's just he was first generation Irish born in this country, and all my grandparents were born in Ireland. So okay.
Hi. I'm real curious about your concept of covenant because I think if we went around, we would all have,
Okay,
kind of a
okay,
different,
that's one of my favorite subjects
yeah.
because it's
How do you arrive or what do you think? I mean, of covenant. What does it mean?
well, first of all, at law, it was a word that migrated from France to England in about the 11th century, and it started out being applied strictly to land agreements because it was a treaty of contract that had special features. For example, you can demand specific performance of it. That's not true in other contracts. Regular contracts, you can breach the contract and pay the damages if the guy sues you. Um, a covenant, the presumption is that if someone breaches a covenant, you will feel it. You're not released from the covenant because the other person did. And the idea is to make the covenant whole again. And that's its major feature to me. It's a special, and it was applied to agreements between lords and vassals and serfs and so on. And it became the ability to covenant over a piece of ground that you would then use to build a safe place to live and a safe place to produce livestock or or be a blacksmith or whatever, and you exchange that for fealty. And so the value developed that if you gave your loyalty to someone and kept it honestly, you would have a good life because you would in return get the things you needed for a good life. And the King James version, which was I think about the 11th century, came out, the Latin and Aramaic term that they used for the relationship between God and the chosen people was basically the word testament. And when the King James version came out, they felt that covenant better described the relationship between God and the chosen people. And that's where that word really became elevated into the spiritual arena. And when congregations, not long after that, began centering on congregations rather than on clergy, then they used their gathering word was covenant. But its importance is that it is personal. Specific performance is required, and it is the presumption is that if someone breaches it, you will heal it. That's kind of a quick explanation.
John, I've got the mic back here. I was married to a Catholic who had 16 years of Catholic education, was never able to really recover from that, although he did attend Unitarian services with me later in our marriage. Are you aware of any literature, books, body of writing that would help a person in that process of coming out of a very dogmatic, fundamentalist religion and help them not, enable them to let go of that?
The only things that come to my mind at all, and there's not much out there that's helpful with that. I don't know. The third iteration of the humanist manifesto is good reading. It's very short, and I don't know if there's enough profundity in there to affect anybody. But um, and there's the Amsterdam Declaration. I don't know if you've seen that. Google it. It's a it's a discussion of variables. I don't know if there is a book that explains that you don't. My thought in all this transition and the way I faced the fear was I thought, well, if God is what they say he is, and if God is worthy of the name, then he knows he gave me my mind. And I'm hedging my bets. I'm going to search for what's right, and I'm going to try to follow it. And then if he winds up sitting on a cloud looking pissed off at me and asking me what the hell I did, I'm going to say, look, you gave me a brain, and with integrity and diligence, I searched for you. And if you wanted me to be other than I am, you shouldn't have stuck Father Pathos in my face for the first 16 years of my life. Anyway, that's all I can say is that if God is God, then he will respect a search with integrity and diligence and a bona fide attempt to live by what you find. And that's how I transitioned. I I do believe in passing that there is more to us than our atoms and molecules. And and I have done a lot of study. I'd love to come back next year and see if there'd be a discussion about that because I've worked hard on it. And when I say I think there is I I believe that my urge to be part of something bigger than myself is the most conscious manifestation I'm capable of that we are all connected more deeply and in ways our brains have not evolved enough yet to grasp and understand, and our technology has not evolved enough yet to detect and measure. But I think we're connected in what now we only describe as metaphysical.
John, I have a follow-up question to the follow-up question about covenants. Excuse me. It's a Unitarian question. If I was
Love them.
if I was following what you said that when you were in Cedar Rapids, they were developing a covenant, and when you got here, there was a covenant here at All Souls. I was really surprised by that. I would have assumed, and obviously I'm assuming falsely, but I'd like to really get this straight.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
But and so here's the question: I thought we probably, when I came to All Souls and learned the covenant here, that this was the Unitarian covenant, that it would have be for all churches. And I'm very surprised to learn. I think I'm learning that that's not the truth.
That's right.
Seems so perfect. Why doesn't everybody? Ours?
Well, that last question, it seems so perfect. Why doesn't everybody do it? I don't have the answer to that because I'd share it. But yeah, congregations are permitted, and those poor folks, they wrote a covenant that it had everything from being nice at meetings and just all kinds of stuff. It was 2 pages, and the minister, it was an interim minister that introduced us to the idea, hadn't really, she didn't have all that much um, uh, with it, but yeah, you're allowed to choose or write your own covenant, and the experience with the two, the big thing I got out of the difference between the two is that if you've got one that can cover the ground in short terms, um, that allow you to say it to each other frequently, um, do that, but then try to stop. I would like to see try to stop and have a service that's devoted to covenant, because that's really truly our freedom document. That's what enables us to have differences, because we know and we consciously continually recite to one another, we're in this together. And I'd like to see every once in a while, maybe once a year, have a service where we talked about our covenant and what each of us and each of us is actually doing to dwell together in peace and to help one another and to seek the truth in love.
I want to thank you for some helping me with some understanding this morning because of my ex-wife was at one point hitting my daughter and she was a fallen away Catholic. And then when she repented, got some psychological help and whatever, she's had a hard time connecting that with her previous Catholic experience. I guess my question would be, do you have an understanding or experiences with other people who kind of had this kind of revelation of understanding and having a difficult time with their previous education in the Catholic Church?
I don't know how much of that I can answer. I can tell you that when I was in practice, uh, I represented kids in the juvenile court who were in and had been taken out of their homes. I represented people in child custody divorce cases where physical discipline was an issue. And I found that where the law intersects with uh, domestic discipline and violence, Catholic homes were very disproportionately represented. It was far, far more than their incidents in the community. So I think it has to do, frankly, I think it has to do in part with a patriarchal religion and this celibacy thing. They have to have guys that, frankly, they gave up the idea of having kids, so kids are not all that important to them. Why the hell do we go to them for advice on how to be parents? I mean, they're just going to tell you to hit them. Um, but and how to get them out of it, I don't know. They go one of two ways. I was lucky. So many kids. I have an older brother who was violent because he saw so much of it. My dad was so good to me. I thought I'm going that way, and I would never. Once I remember an incident when I was. Are we out of time?
No.
I remember once an incident where the Emily hit Megan, and they were both under 5. And Megan yelled. She was upstairs, and I was reading the newspaper. and I heard the yowl, and I rattled the paper and thumped my feet and said, "Oh, what's going on up there?" And nothing, just being gruff and trying to cool things down. And the older girl said to the younger, "Dad's coming, Dad's coming. Please, please forgive me, Megan. Please forgive me." And she had this fear in her voice, and it just stopped me cold. I never want my child to be as afraid of me as I was of my mother, ever. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why I lucked out. Uh, and I can't tell you how to help people recovering. I'll tell you what I did. I scared the living hell out of them if I represented their kid and they were smacking their kid around. Um, I took their deposition and I told them about the possibility of foster care and about how just damn near anybody would love to have that kid in their home and so on. And when I was done with them, I put as much of the fear of God in them as I could.
I just had a, I just have a, John, first of all, thank you for this. I have a comment for those who are looking for help for people who are fallen away Catholics or who are trying to shake whatever it is that sticks to you. I was not raised Catholic. I was raised Lutheran, which which Lutherans compete very hard with Catholics about putting a layer of guilt over everything that happens. And frankly, it was the revelations about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny that started moving me away from organized religion. Because I thought if my parents can lie to me about something like that, then this whole issue of God, and heaven and hell and salvation and damnation, that's got to be bullshit, or at least questionable. But anyway, I would think seriously if if you're a lapsed Catholic, if you have friends that are struggling, I would think that a good bookstore self-help section has got to be loaded with what do they call them, memoirs t- or references from people who have worked their way through that. And of course, it'll be like anything else. One person's approach to decatholicizing themselves um, will be might work for you, but it might not. Another one. But I would say, Google, set, figure out a way to phrase the issue and Google it, or go to a bookstore and look in the self-help section. I'll bet there's tons of references available for that.
Yeah, I think that's good practical advice.
And may I add therapy? Call me a fool, but sometimes we need a little help getting over the the humps in the road, especially deeply held beliefs we don't even know we have. That can be tricky to uncover and recover from. So my apologies for taking the last bit, except to say there are a few times in life when you draw a line in the sand. And when I was raising my children, that was the line I drew. No physical violence. Because I had been, quote unquote, spanked as a youngster. My mother was the chief disciplinarian because she was home with us 6 kids all day. Anyway, but she did the righteous anger thing, and I remember one time she would grab whatever was handy, ping pong paddle, yardsticks. I cannot tell you how many yardsticks were broken on my butt. Fly swatters, hairbrush, her own hand, yanking hair. I'm just going to let it go.
Man,
But one day we were downstairs, and for some reason she was angry and wanting to punish my sister and I. And she grabbed this cloth belt from the laundry basket. We were ironing down there because it was cooler and it was summer and it was hot with the iron. And this cloth belt didn't do anything. It was just like a limp spaghetti noodle. And everybody, my mom included, started laughing. It really, really changed things. So one never knows. One never knows. But I just want to thank you so much. You were a glorious end to a wonderful summer. Thank you.
Thank you. One last comment. The child psychologist, I used to put him on the stand in custody and juvenile cases. I got to be friends with him, and he said, the only time you really have to hit a child is when that child is being smarter than you are. And I like that. Anyway, thanks for listening.